The problem with a lot of charisma advice, whether it's a quick 5-minute animated video where it's like 10 tips on how to be charismatic, or I've put out videos like that before, or channels who specifically focus on social charisma, not necessarily as a pickup thing and seduction, but just being more socially charismatic and learning how to handle the spotlight. And they'll throw out phrases like the loudest person in the room is often, the weakest, and you have to learn how to be the strong, silent type. And, they have certain rules. And while these rules can be very helpful, they are tailored to certain personalities. There is a lot to be said for adapting and tailoring certain things that fit your tendencies. Because if you just try a one-size-fits-all approach, you might see some marginal gains, but then you're going to run into a problem where you're stretching your personality beyond what you're comfortable with. And in some ways, this is a good thing, because you are going to want to change and evolve, especially if it's just a flat negative what you do, right? But you are also going to be benefiting from finding tricks or changes that are still in line with your affinities, right? There's a lot of different metaphors that I could use here. I've been playing a lot of the card game Magic the Gathering. It's super nerdy, right? But in that card game, you have different colors, right? You have blue, which is like water, and red, fire. You have colorless, you have black, which is like swamps and death. And different cards have to be casted with different types of mana, different energy. Or if you want a less nerdy example, there's different types of martial arts, right? There are guys who are very aggressive, so they do more boxing and more like striking, Muay Thai, or kickboxing or Taekwondo. And then you have your jiu-jitsus and your judos. And then you have your wrestlings, which are they're aggressive, but also defensive and grappling. And then within those arts, you have different styles of how people choose to express that, that style. Certain people are going to find more familiarity and comfort within a certain style. And that's what they're going to focus on, right? There's certain fighters who are known as grapplers and certain fighters who are known as strikers. They just like it better, right? And then you have people who are kind of all-arounders, right? They're not necessarily the best, but they're good enough all around, and then they end up winning because they have a wide range of skills. And there's people who are champions from every background, right? And whatever kind of metaphor you want to come up with, certain characters, when you play a video game, do you choose the big two-handed weapon that swings really slow? Are you the guy who goes for certain kinds of like goes for poison builds or bleed builds, right? You want to ask yourself, what are my tendencies when it comes to my personality? What do I like to do, right? Because if you are naturally a more subdued, quiet person, then when you're trying to become more charismatic, you want to do it in ways that maximizes very small expressions, right? And I'll go into what I mean by that in a little bit, right? If you're more of an outgoing person, really, really off the walls, excitable, then you're going to have to do things that fall within that. Now, it doesn't mean you can't sometimes be quiet, right? Because, for instance, if you're a really outgoing person, and then you do be quiet, there's going to be a noticeable silence because you're usually the loudest guy in the room, or you're usually very energetic. But then when you're not like that, people are going to feel an emptiness, right? And that can actually grab their attention and be charismatic, right? So the definition of charisma is attention or magnetism. But let's just say attention to keep it really non-woo-woo. Just, are they paying attention to you? And are they interested in paying attention to you? Right? You're not manipulating them with like, people can get attention through guilt and shame, or, because they hold leverage over people. Like they're always the guy who's paying for everything. I mean, people do these things, right, to get attention, right? But you are simply getting attention because they want to give you attention, because they like your sense of humor, because you're funny, something that's a positive thing grabbing their attention. So if you're a really quiet kind of person and you don't express yourself a lot, you're going to sometimes need to express yourself a lot, because something has to grab them. And then when you go back to your normal state, they have seen that you can be outgoing for a couple seconds or be really funny, and they go, oh, there's a different side to him, and they might feel intrigued to see more of it, but then they have to work to do it. They're going to try and get it out of you. And I know that this works because it's happened to me, where I get attracted to the girl by finally seeing some of her charisma come out, right? Like this one girl who she was so beautiful, and the sex was amazing with her. Like she was some of my favorite sex in my life. And she picked me up one time to go for a ride, and I got in the car, and she usually is the kind of cool, like quiet type. And she'll be a little, not sassy, but she's kind of just the cool, quiet type, really beautiful. She comes from a richer family, so she kind of has that, I guess, aristocratic kind of vibe to her. And she put on some music, and I was just dancing because, I can be really outgoing and just having fun. And I'm dancing in the car and looking at her and flirting with her, and I kiss her. And then she looks at me for a second, and she goes, and just dances for a little bit. And it just made me smile. And I was like, wow, like, hey, there you are. You're showing some of your personality. And she kind of smiles and laughs. And I say, you really should show more of that. It's really attractive. Now, that could come off a little bit like white knighty, like, you should smile more, right? It sounds kind of fucking gay, but, I smashed her pussy, harder than anyone ever has. She told me, she's like, absolute best sex I've ever had in my life. It was just enjoying it for hours and hours and hours. We must have fucked like 8, 9, 10 times in the first night, right? Well into the morning, and then more after when we woke up. So, I was genuinely trying to show her, like, that was really, it was a nice thing to see when you're constantly putting up the act, because it is an act, right? But it was a good act. I mean, it works on me. I mean, she was beautiful, so that's doing a lot of the work. But, I did feel myself feeling pulled, to do work. And I had to try and constrain myself so that I wasn't like chasing after her, because I was very physically attracted to her. But also her personality had a way of kind of getting you to chase after her. So she had game, right? But the other way is also true, where, like I said, you can be a really outgoing guy, and then when you have quiet, people can be pulled into you. Now, you can actually do this sometimes when you're in a bad mood, right? Because I usually am very expressive. I've learned how to be a bit more balanced now, but especially when I was younger, people would notice immediately. Well, actually, no, I can't lie. I mean, I wear my emotions on my face, right? So there have been times in recent history where, I was upset for whatever reason, and people were like, hey, are you okay? Because it's such a drastic change from when I'm in a good mood to when I'm not. Like, you can see it. I do not hide my emotions well, right? I wasn't being mean to anyone, right? And I wasn't expressing my anger at anyone or my displeasure at anyone, but I was sulking, right? And I don't hide my emotions well. Even when I try, they bleed through. People can just feel me fucking emanating energy. It's like I ooze energy. Now, I'm not saying that I don't want that to be like a manipulative thing, right? I just happened to be in a bad mood, but, I was doing something with people, so I'm not just going to be like, hey, I'm going to leave, right? Which I have done on occasion. When I got upset, I just left the situation because I don't want to ooze that energy. But I was, and people noticed. They're like, hey, are you okay? Hey, like multiple people were like, is everything okay? I'm like, yeah, it's fine. Whatever. But it drew attention, right? And so I wasn't doing it on purpose. But if I were to do it on purpose in a positive way, like I wouldn't do negativity as some sort of trick. That would be fucking psychopathic. But like, I'm normally so outgoing, and if I had a moment of quiet, like, if you catch yourself being really gregarious and and then just catch yourself and go, okay, I'm going to calm down for a little bit and see how someone reacts to it. Like you're on a date with a girl and you're really expressing yourself a lot. And like right now, I caught myself, like I'm getting really excited talking about this stuff because I like to talk about this shit. It's fun. It's interesting. And I like to hear myself talk. But I am just sitting in my fucking room alone. So, I kind of take note of the situation and I go, okay, people are going to watch this, but at the same time, I am just kind of alone. So let me kind of calm down, right? And obviously, I'm not going to stop talking completely because I have information to share with you guys. But if it was a social situation and I caught myself being really outgoing and getting energetic, I'd go, okay, let me calm down for a second and just be quiet. Not talk, not feel, restrain the desire to comment on something that I want to comment on. Or if you're a really comedic person and you're always telling jokes, this is another thing that you can do, is you want to stop telling so many jokes. Like cut down your jokage by 50% or 25%, and you can experiment and see if by telling less jokes, the jokes that I do tell are better. People react to them better. Like, have you ever thought about having, like, if you were friends with, like, a professional comedian, how exhausting it probably would be? Like, I mean, they're good at what they do. But to be honest, I don't really find most comedians funny. I just don't. I think most of them, like, try way too fucking hard. But let's say you find them genuinely funny. I'm sure being around them at first would be cool. But then constantly being around them, because a lot of people who are funny tend to be, tends to not be the nicest type of humor, right? So they're always fucking teasing you. And, okay, sure, you got to have some thick skin. But at a certain point, it just gets exhausting having to always listen to their fucking jokes, right? Because also, like on a deeper psychological level, they're telling jokes to get attention. So they're seeking attention. I mean, I imagine most comedians are pretty fucking miserable, right? Because they're quite negative people. But they express it in a funny way, in a charismatic way. But it would almost be too much, right? And you would find them annoying at some point. Maybe, right? Some people would like it, but I feel like I'd get pretty fucking annoyed with someone who's constantly making jokes. But if you took a break from them, and then you saw them later, you would kind of be refreshed and be like, oh, yeah, quick, cool. You would appreciate it more, sort of, right? So the same thing is when you're always being a jokey kind of guy, cut it down, and you might actually find that it lands better and someone doesn't get overwhelmed by your charisma, right? So you have to learn how to, but that I would only advise that if you were tending towards always being exuberant. But some people can, but there's even different kinds of exuberance or outgoingness, right? So there's a spectrum of like introverted to extroverted, where extroverted people feed off of being very loud, and introverted people have, a smaller energy reserve where they can be funny or be, outgoing or expressive, but they have a smaller battery tank, and then they don't actually feed off of it. It drains them. But let's say, outgoing, they're just very expressive. People on that end of the spectrum have different types within that, right? So you might find people who are always telling jokes. That's the way they express their outgoingness. You might find people who love to fucking tell stories. There's a storyteller, right? So you have the comedian, you have the storyteller. Like I met a guy recently. I was playing cards, and my buddy called me over. He's like, hey, meet this guy. He likes to play Dungeons and Dragons. And I was like, oh, cool. And I started to, I met him and started talking, and I'm like, oh, cool. Are you running a campaign? He's like, yeah, I did this. And then he starts going into like, yeah, so I set them up with this. And he starts going into this long story, which would be totally cool to listen to. Like, he was a good storyteller, and I enjoyed talking to him. But I was in the middle of a game. Like, my friend had called me over, and I was like trying to, like, he kept going and kept going and kept going. And I guess I kind of fed it because I was responding to him, but I was also trying to give off the hint, like, hey, let's wrap it up because I got to get back to my game. But you have that, that struggle of politeness, right? So I kept listening, but after 10 minutes, I'm like, okay, this guy's not seeing, the body language, right? He's just like going into, he even got into like a stance, like, and he was like telling stories. I was like, okay, like he's good. He's clearly a good DM, like the guy who runs a Dungeons and Dragons campaign and tells the stories and explains everything, right? He's clearly good at what he does, but that wasn't really the moment to do it, right? And I was like, okay, I was like, hey man, let me get your number. And then, sent him a text and I was like, we can talk about this some other time, but I got to finish my game. And he's like, oh, okay, cool. No worries. He was cool about it. And I really tried not to be rude, but that wasn't the moment to do it, right? So being outgoing and charismatic, you also have to find your timings. So you have to find your, how much to do it so that you don't overwhelm people, but then also don't underwhelm people. Like use your fucking charisma too, right? I would never tell that guy, hey, don't be a storyteller. I mean, that's like, grabbing a fish and throwing it on, into a desert. It's like, it doesn't survive in that environment. He's going to have to storytell. That's what he likes to do. So let him do it. Right. And he should do it and he's good at it, but you also got to find your timing. So sort of your, metric of like, okay, I find my affinity. I find my type of charisma, whether it's expressive or unexpressive, we can call it that. Introverted, extroverted. So you have how much you should do it. So the people on this end shouldn't overdo it, but then people on this end shouldn't underdo it, right? You're going to have to find times to be more expressive, to be louder, to tell a joke, to show more emotions with your face. And you have to snap yourself out of it. Like, okay, my charisma comes from being understated and then having moments of spiking emotion, and then people get drawn into it. Like it's kind of low grade, and then boop, and you're like, oh, cool. It's like listening to a song that's kind of the same the whole time, like low grade techno that's like douche 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 douche, right? Some people like that, and then some people like the crazy fucking shit, right? So, but even that, the crazy shit, you got to have a break at some point, or it gets overwhelming. Right, that's why the drop is so good, right? And you're like, oh, it's coming, and then that's how music works, and that's how personalities and charisma work, and attention works, right? So don't underwhelm, because if the techno song was just the entire time, I mean, some people like it, but you want to add some fucking variance to it, right? So if you're on this end, don't underwhelm. You got to have moments of spiking your emotions with a joke, with a story, with an expression, with changing your volume, with touch, some way that is showing emotion, right? Some change in your voice like this, like intonating and emphasizing words, or, changing my volume and then suddenly talking like this. And then I go back to doing this, and talking my normal kind of lower energy, but then I need to have moments where I'm going to speed things up, right? You have to stretch it. So in terms of, what's the word I'm looking for? Volume. Just like, just a measurement, size. The fuck am I looking for, guys? I'm looking for some sort of explanation, right? But just like, yeah, volume is actually a decent word, right? I'll probably come out with one later, but let's just say it for now. So if you're here, you got to turn down the volume sometimes, and if you're here, you got to sometimes turn up the volume, right? Quantity. But then you also have timing, okay? So no matter what your personality is, you have to learn how to adjust your timing according to your personality. So if you're more on this end of the spectrum, you got to know when it's appropriate to do this expressive stuff, right? If everyone else, okay, so timing, like that example, but then I guess here's a third one also. You have to look at your environment. If everyone is, let's say everyone's really outgoing and you're kind of a shyer person. If you just kind of be quiet the entire time, it might be that you are like this void over here, and then there's all this stuff going on, and then like let's say a girl is kind of like, oh, but this guy's not talking at all, like she could be drawn to it. That is possible. That can work, right? But in order for it to work, you have to have nonverbal charisma. You have to have the body language of someone who's comfortable, right? So you have to adapt to your environment. So I'll give you an example. So let's say there's a bunch of really outgoing, charismatic people in the group, and they're talking a lot and this and that, and you're more of a low-key guy. If you look kind of like shy and like, okay, I don't know what to do, that can also grab girls' attention, because some girls kind of like will be like, oh, let me go help him. I mean, I've had girls, give me pity attention before, and then it actually turned into attraction, but that's not really something that consistently works, right? It only kind of works under like a very complicated condition, which I could go into, but I guess, well, it's kind of like, if you're normally like the really outgoing, charismatic guy and she has some sort of an idea of who you are, but then you are changing your energy because maybe you're in a bad mood or you're just not feeling it, again, she's going to feel that difference and then want to give you attention. And even if you're like sad, I've been at parties when I was looking sad, and I have girls come up to me and like want to talk to me and, take care of me, right? So you can actually work that angle, but it's not something that you would want to do consistently, right? So just because don't be fucking depressed, dude. But if let's say you are just generally kind of a low-key guy, you need to have good fundamentals with your body and your face. So the first thing is that you can't look uncomfortable with the situation. Like if you look at a place like everyone's talking and you're like, okay, when do I get attention? And you look like you're desperate for attention, needy, which is very clear in the way that you look. If you've ever been around someone who clearly is just like not the highest value person in the group, like let's just be adults and just admit that not everyone is of equal social value. You've seen it and you can recognize it. Now, can you put your finger on what exactly it is about them? Sure, if you look close enough, right? It's their body language looks uncomfortable, their face looks uncomfortable. They're either like stiff as a board, which is discomfort, or like very fidgety, which is also discomfort. And you don't feel drawn to them. Like they may be quiet, which is creating a contrast between all the noise, but it's not a likable quietness or a likable quiet. But then you can have someone who they seem comfortable, they're relaxed, they're just kind of listening to the conversation, And they will jump in, though. You're going to have to jump in at some point, right? So you see like a break in the fucking frenzied conversation and you make a comment. And you go, you know what? I was in a similar situation one time, right? So everyone's talking like, oh, this, that, and you're kind of more quiet. But when you talk with authority, right? And it's just like, hey, I was in a situation like that once. No one's going to listen to you. You have to like be able to be on that frequency. Maybe that's what I wanted. No, it didn't. Frequency didn't fit what I was trying to say earlier. But yeah, but you need to be on people's frequency. So environment or frequency will be like the third condition. You know what? I was totally in a situation like that. And, when I was there, I did this and this and this. And everyone turns to you and gives you their attention. And then you finish with it. And then you have to be good at, your storytelling or explaining your viewpoint on it or this or that, right? And then they're going to go, oh, okay, like he has a cool opinion or he's smart or, he talks in a sexy way. Or now that they're actually paying attention to you, they're like, oh, like I think he's good looking, or like, oh, I like the way he dresses, or he has an interesting look or something, right? You could have a cool product, but if no one's paying attention to it, then, you're not going to sell a lot, right? The same thing with if you're you work with low key types of charisma, right? Versus very loud, outgoing charisma. But then after you have that moment on the spotlight, you get back and you go, okay. You go back to kind of being a bit of a wallflower, right? But you are a brilliant, imposing, respectable wallflower. Like, the flower's on the wall rather than something that's in the corner kind of just watching like, beep, what's going on? Right? So you have to adapt to your environment. Or the other way around is if you are very expressive and you're in a room full of really quiet people, you might want to feel out the room first and see how they react to you being really out loud and outgoing. And you can dominate the attention, right? And they might appreciate it and they might like it a lot. Charisma tends to work better on the expressive extremes. Like, it's just that person usually tends to get the most attention. Unless the person who's being quiet and stoic has some sort of an authority that's built into the environment, which again is a condition. Like, it's his house, like, you're having a party at his house, or it's his, he knows everyone and he's the one who kind of gets everyone together. And he's very good at that kind of charisma. There will be certain things that can make that guy stand out, but usually, more than not, the more expressive, charismatic person is usually getting the most results, which tends to make sense, because when you see most people who are successful with girls, they tend to just be more of the expressive, charismatic, which is not to say that you can't be on the unexpressive, lower frequency end. That's just, I guess, statistically how it works out, right? So if you are on that lower end of like, the frequency, you need to have the ability to kind of jump up and show something, right? And then the outgoing guy, if he's in a group with introverts, he could just like dominate it. It just could just be a straight up, like, he just dunks on everyone and is the most interesting person in the room. But he still needs to have the skill to read the room and know if he's like hogging the spotlight too much, because then people get annoyed with you. But you can still pull it off. Like, if people can't really, like, let's look at it as a competition. Like, I mean, hopefully you're not competing with everyone that you fucking meet and trying to, AMOG everyone. But that's an old term. If you guys don't know, AMOG, it's from like the old pickup days, where it means alpha male of the group. And when you AMOG someone or MOG someone, it's kind of like you punk them. It's like, yeah, I'm the coolest guy in the room and no one can fucking do about it, or I'm going to get all the girls, or I'm going to get this girl. And, the other guy is like, oh, okay, I'm not going to do anything. Hopefully you're not like a toxic asshole piece of shit, right? But let's for a second look at it as a competition. And let's say that, you're kind of more outgoing and the other guy, maybe she likes him, but he's not as outgoing, and you just kind of dominate the energy of the room. I've had a situation where I was like, the guy was really outgoing and I was like, okay, I'm just going to play in the back. And then like, he just got all the attention and I didn't get the girl. Like, it wasn't like some sort of, okay, I'm going to be quiet and she's going to notice me. Right. But I tend to not like to directly compete with people, because I feel a lot of empathy for them. And when I have done it, I can win, but I just feel bad doing it. Like, it just, if I see people embarrassing themselves, like, I physically feel bad, right? So I don't like to do that, but I had to find a way to win anyways, right? So usually what I would do is I would just leave the situation, right? So instead of sitting there and just kind of like, okay, because I am more outgoing, it's like, all right, I want to compete, but not, and this and that. And then I'm like, I mean, he's clearly not having any empathy for me because he's trying to dominate the situation. And I'm sitting there like, all right, well, but I don't want to be like him. I don't want to be a piece of shit. So I'm like, okay, what's the best situation? Oh, I'm just going to leave. So I get out of the situation, go to like different parts of the party, right? And then I do my thing somewhere else. And then she might be drawn to that. She'll be talking to him, but then at some point he fucks up and then she looks over and I'm like getting all this attention for, talking with a new girl or something, right? So I did find ways to adapt things to my personality, right? So you're going to have to look at how much volume you're using, right? Or, you're not overdoing it or underdoing it. You got to look at your environment, right? And you got to look at timing, because there is a time to do things given the environment and your volume. But timing is just an aspect of charisma, of like comedic timing or storytelling timing, right? In pacing in a story. So there are these attributes of charisma that you have to master, but they can work with any type of charisma and any type of personality. So it's very important that you ask yourself, what kind of charisma do I work off of? How is my timing? How do I, am I too loud or not loud enough in certain environments, giving those timings? So I guess timing and environment would be like when dictates your volume. So it's kind of like it's like a triangle of like interdependentness. Like if the environment and the timing calls for it, you can just always be super loud and super gregarious and outgoing, right? But sometimes because of the environment, because of timing, you need to be low key, because if you're really outgoing, it's not going to work. Like if you're at, some meeting, right? You're not going to be super loud because someone's talking, right? But you can like look over at her and like give her a look, or like give her a wink, or, a smile or something, or just a wave, right? That would be charismatic, given the environment and given the timing. So you choose low volume, right? So start thinking of your life, and many social situations you've been in, and go, okay, here was the environment, here was my volume, and was I hitting the right timing with that volume of charisma? So did I match or try to contrast the environment based on my own personal affinity and my type of charisma? And a lot of times when you're failing, you're either not going with your type of charisma, so your frequency, which I guess would be the fourth thing. Like, you just got to find your frequency first, what you tend towards. And then you do need to learn how to do other types of charisma. If you're outgoing, try to learn how to be more low-key. If you're more low-key, try to be more expressive, for when you need it. And also to temper your volume, because you don't want to be too of an extreme. But then also recognizing the environment you're in. If you're a higher status person in the group, you can just do a lot of what you want, right? But there still is a skill there and involved. And then timing, of course. There's a time to be really outgoing, and there's a time not to be. There's a time to be kind of in the middle, right? So ask yourself first, what is your frequency? Like, what do you like to do? And when I work with my clients, I try to keep them in their frequency, because you can technically become anything you want, right? But it's going to take a lot more time and manpower to pull yourself into a new personality. So it's better to just work with what you've got and then maximize its effectiveness based on what I've gone over on this video. So I feel like the timing of this video has hit its end. I could continue giving examples that would probably give you more clarity, but at a certain point, people aren't listening anymore. I mean, I've probably lost a lot of people already. I mean, it's a 32-minute video, but that's my frequency and my affinity, is I fucking talk a lot and explain things in great detail. But it's going to lose some people, but I have to accept that, because it does work a lot, because I have clients and make a living out of this. So, clearly it has some effectiveness. And I think it gives people a lot more information than most other coaches out there are giving, because they can't explain things even to a fraction of the degree that I do, because I'm just better. So yeah, timing, find your frequency, then learn timing, learn volume, and learn environment. And you'll understand how to do charisma in any way with any personality. So there you go. Best video on the internet when it comes to charisma, if you're willing to sit there and pay attention to it. If you're not, well, sucks to suck. Hope you enjoyed the video. See you guys soon. Buy all my shit in the description below, and I'll see you soon.